to the Global Communications Podcast, Dion. It's great to have you with us today.
Great. Sandra, thank you very, very much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Thank you. And you are based in Johannesburg, South Africa. You're the founder of Flux Trends. Can you tell us a bit about South Africa vis-a-vis Africa?
Yes, well, until a few years ago, we were the largest economy. Nigeria knocked us off that pedestal. But it has always been a very interesting one because South Africa, because of its really dark history, the apartheid history, we have a dual economy. So you have a first world living side by side with a third world. Not a fact not to be proud of is the most unequal society probably on the planet. But therein lies the kind of the dynamics and the dynamism of South Africa that is never a boring place to be. So, so that's one thing people say, why are you in South Africa? I say, well, it's because you really feel alive. You either love something passionately or you hate something passionately. There is no gray middle ground here. So.
That's great. And you founded Flux Trends in 2006. Could you tell us a bit more about your company, why you started it then, and what you were hoping to address and or achieve?
Well, I had a very long, almost a 2-decade or longer career in print media, in magazines and publishing and in the fashion industry. And I'd kind of done all that I could there. And one day I just decided I wanted to start a information distillation service. So that's actually what Flux Trends started out as. Wasn't exactly a trends company, but I was really interested in how the world worked. And I started out in a really analog way. I used to cut little clippings from newspapers and magazines and keep them. And at the end of the year or during the mid-year, I would just sort them into little categories. Something about politics, something about religion, something about popular culture. And that actually became, to this day, that is the kind of methodology that we use at Flux. So we look at joining the dots between very unexpected sources or disparate sources and making sure that it's relevant for businesses. The relevance for business happened about 5 years into having Flux Trends, and it was being seen as a consumer insights company. And while we can do that, I didn't want to just be a consumer insights company. I wanted to differentiate Flux Trends, and we put together the mantra Trends is Business Strategy, and that put us onto this trajectory. The same time disruptions we're having, and so to this day, we've been known as a company that understands a lot of disruptions and how that changes business models. And as a result, 99.9% of all of our clients are actually big corporate clients.
So in the past 14 years, what trends or disruptions have surprised you the most?
I think what surprised me is not so much the trends, because obviously I love looking at that. I love looking into the future, a glimpse into the future. But I think what surprised me the most is how unreceptive, should I say, a lot of companies really were about this, this kind of this futurist view of things and what's happening. I think maybe in the last couple of years or 5 years, the technological disruption has forced a lot of companies to suddenly wake up and take it a lot more seriously. But I always remind people that we have tech disruptors and also non-tech disruptors, and sometimes the non-tech disruptors are the ones that really hit companies' bottom lines even more.
And you mentioned the term futurist, which I think some people get confused by, and maybe are not entirely confident with using trend research data in their lives and work, maybe seeing it as more airy future type information. So why is that? What advice do you have for using trends or future data, both for companies and individuals?
Well, we actually have a saying at Flux is don't be 2 hours ahead of the curve, be 20 minutes ahead of the curve, because you'll scare the horses. And in the early days of Flux, I scared a lot of horses, because if you go a little, even though you are certain about the trajectory of a new technology or a new trend, if you position that, especially to large corporate companies who move a lot slower, they're going to completely discredit the information and they're going to just turn the other way. So at Flux, my colleague and partner Bronwyn and I actually don't position ourselves, even though we are positioned that way, as futurists. We prefer, the term that we are trend analysts. So we look at, we analyze what trends are happening, what's moving faster, what's moving slower. And in essence, what we do with our foresight services is scenario planning. So you look at different sectors, and that dovetails very nicely with our methodology. So you look at what might happen in the political realm, what might happen with the state of the economy, and then you match that up with something socio-cultural, like the emergence of your Gen Zs or Black Lives Matters, how all of that mixes into sort of a potent potion that you should be looking at or drinking, and seeing what comes of that with your business.
Can you explain scenario planning to the audience? It's a terminology used quite a bit, particularly in management consulting circles. But what does it mean in layman or women?
Yeah. So I mean, just to go back, the reason why we start shying away from the label of being futurists is, I think futurists, it's a very speculative thing. You can also pull everything out the hat and say, yes, in 5 or 10 years time, this will happen. And in the 14 years that I've run Flux Trends, I've seen what was supposed to be the next best thing since sliced bread just completely fail and not gain traction. With scenario planning is taking a lot of different things into consideration. So, there's a high road. If the economy of a country does this, if the politics and policies go this way, this could be it. If it goes the another way, this could be the other one. So you are presenting a client with a variety of scenarios to say, this is what you can plan with. Well, and with scenario planning, you can also start categorizing things as, this is really speculative, and if you want a much longer term strategy, this could happen. You can look at that. If you want a much more shorter, there's much more of a possibility of this happening. So take this into account. So scenario planning allows a company to really consider their options, and then it's up to that company. We just lay the scenarios open, but it's up to that company to say, okay, we're going to go with this option because we think it's going to be the closest for us. But it's providing a lot more options for people given what we know.
And do you think as well that the world and people in general are more inherently risk adverse? If we look at 2020, it's been a really pivotal year for all of us. It's been a fast, extreme change for many, but not everybody. Those who are pushing the envelope in terms of technology and innovation already have been better prepared to handle change, and some people able to maximize the situation to their business benefit. What are your thoughts on that?
I do think people are completely risk averse, and especially in our with our experience with big companies, the larger the company or the corporate is, the more conservative the appetite is for change or for risk. But I think generally people just don't like change. People like the status quo to remain as it is. If it's not broke, don't fix it kind of mentality. So yes, we come across that every day almost with the companies that we work with, is just a digging in of heels to say no, this is going to become too fast, or we're going to rock the boat too much. But I think 2020 has completely changed all of that. It has thrown people not kicking and screaming, but just screaming off the cliff edge and saying, you've got to try this thing. So just for example, the whole, remote working and working from home, it's been advocated by so many people and so many sort of HR specialists. You've got to do this. I've been saying for many years that a 40-hour work week that starts at 9 and ends at 5 is a quaint relic of the 20th century. We really got to get over this. At the beginning of the pandemic, they said, this is the biggest global experiment of work from home. And lo and behold, companies are saying, well, this actually does work, and we've just got to change our management system and not be helicopter managers and not expect bums on seats and you know, and trust people a little bit more to get on with what they do, rather than looking over their shoulders and trying to helicopter manage people. So so yes, 2020 is going to be a very pivotal year for the acceleration of a lot of these trends and technologies.
And I think the one generation whose voice has really risen to the public's attention has been Gen Z or Gen Z in 2020. And I read a great column you wrote, I think in June, called Generation Z, Architects of Our New World Order. And one of the amazing facts from that column was that Africa has the largest concentration of Gen Zs on the planet. Median age in sub-Saharan Africa is 18 years old, and Africa's future and impact on the world is dependent on this generation. So what are your insights onto this very vocal new generation coming up?
Yes, a lot of people raised eyebrows because I used the term New World Order, and they go, "Oh my God, that's really dystopian." So, but I wanted to get people's attention with that, and I do truly, in its true sense of the word, think that it is a New World Order that is emerging. And what I, you know, for listeners who are not clear on who Gen Zs are, they're anything from your prepubescent, so 10, 11 years old. The oldest Gen Zs are 21, 22, so they're coming of age at the moment. And they are starting not only to be your new consumers, if you're a consumer brand, but they're also starting to come into the workplace. So they are your new employees. And if I say to people, if you thought millennials were a difficult bunch to understand and manage, you ain't seen nothing yet, because these are humanity's very, very first true digital natives. So this cohort know no world without internet, without smartphones, without Google. So I tell parents and I tell teachers, I'm sorry for you, but you are no longer the font of wisdom. Google is. And if you think about that, it has remapped the way in which Gen Zs receive information. If you have a curious mind, and that's what I keep saying to people, our old education systems of spoon feeding or prompting questions is also an outdated way of doing things. You need to instill curiosity in these young heads. And if they have enough of that curiosity, they will find the information themselves. They will ask Google, they will get that information. They don't wait for somebody to give that information to them. As a result, you see a really high level, not only of entrepreneurship. So I've seen too many case studies, whether it's in developing countries or developed countries, of 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, all who have started a little sideline business already. So you know, by the time they're 21, they probably tried 2 businesses. They might be really small-scale businesses, but they've actually tried 2 businesses on their own. Parallel to that, and that's what I think a lot of people find a little bit unnerving about this generation, is a really high social justice barometer. So in that article that I wrote, you know, I say the pandemic has given this generation the excuse to say to an older generation, specifically your baby boomers, I told you so, and this is your fault. You have brought us to this point of bad politics, social fabric disintegrating, economic systems breaking down. And that is why, you know, I glibly say the millennials were much more of a kumbaya generation. They kickstarted the sharing economy, you know, Airbnbs, all of those kind of things. But Generation Zs or Generation Zs feel it a lot more, and they want to make the world a better place. They really have a very, very deep rooted social justice barometer, but also a need to make the world a better place. So how that extrapolates into brands and businesses is they're not just going to buy your product. They're going to ask a lot of questions about sustainability, about all those things. In terms of employees, they don't want a job. They want a lifestyle, and they want that job to bring them purpose and meaning. They want to contribute to it. So that is why there's such a disconnect with your kind of baby boomer management to say, you don't understand the business, so you shut up because you're a junior. And then HR managers say, but there's such a quick churn of these young people, they don't want to stay in our organization. And I'm saying, well, is there any reason why they should if they are just considered cogs in the wheel? So going back to the whole Africa one, if you think about the kind of the technological boom that's starting to happen in Africa and this generation, the future is definitely going to be created by Gen Zs on Africa. And if you look at the rest of the world with Asian communities around a lot of the countries around the world, the future mid-century is going to be in Africa. This is really the new world order. So I'm very emphatic on that. And that's why that's going to, to come through. So that's why I said in the article, listen to them. They are the digital natives, and especially to companies where I say, they don't know the business. I say, yes, but they know the digital side of the business much better than you do. So the user experience, the customer experience in terms of being digital natives should be incorporated into every single business, and you should listen to them.
They are proactive communicators and they're powerful communicators as a group. And I think as a Gen Xer, it makes me sit back in a little trepidation at the way they're doing that. Coming from, I think we're a more obedient generation. We're more, you have a right with your opinions and we share and we teamwork. Team was very big in the 90s. Now we see this group that is very adamant about their worldview and ensuring that everyone hears them. I think a concern for myself and others in the Gen X, the boomers, it's a little taking it in a militaristic tone. I know that's a strong word, but if you don't agree with me, then you may be in trouble type of thing. So what is happening there? Do you think that will balance out over time? Is that a youth characteristic, or is it going to really be the brand of that generation going forward?
I understand that fear, and I think that is the very visceral reaction that you see specifically about older white males and their reaction to Greta Thunberg. It's just, I call it the Marmite effect. You either love her or you hate her, and it's a very specific demographic that really, really, really hates her. And I think it's exactly what you've pinpointed. But I think yes, they're also at the coalface of cancel culture, so they understand cyberbullying and all of that. So it's part of that world. It's part of the way they do things. But I feel that once they move into their 20s, they get into the workplace, you are going to start seeing that same militancy translate into what we're seeing with young politicians in America. So, for example, AOC, the way in which she's come through there, you sort of get into the establishment. You have to start making policies. You have to play the game of politics in Washington, and I think it will kind of sort of dampen, not really dampen, but it will slightly blunt the sharp edges. But that sword is still going to be there, so it will be there. But I just want to share with you something that's really interesting, because I've had to delve into the murky depths of TikTok, because I'm writing a business article about TikTok becoming this geopolitical porn that's happening. But one of the more interesting things, and it's just about this generation, and it's just so it's so telling, that there's, because of TikTok's huge success, you've got a lot of other companies trying to replicate that. So they've got a whole lot of things that are coming through, and the numbers of the sort of the influencers on TikTok are just completely staggering. But one of the rivals has just employed a rival TikTok user who is his name is Josh Richards. He's 18 years old. He has 21 million followers there, and he has just been employed as the chief strategic officer for a new app called Triller. So 18 years old, and you are being employed as the chief strategic officer because you understand that, and the queen of TikTok is somebody called Charli D'Amelio. who has, I think she's got 78 million followers. Each of her posts has about, on average, 30 to 40 million likes. That is serious communication and engagement power. If you're talking communication, that is it. So when older companies and older execs say, "Oh, we'll discount those," I'm saying, well, one company's just hired the 18-year-olds as a strategic officer. So yes.
It's interesting because
Power.
I'm thinking back, and for Gen X, the dot-com boom was an equivalent for this generation. And there was a lot of chief strategy and VPs who were 22, 23 back in the late 90s into the early 2000s, and the floor fell out from underneath all of us. I was working in the ad agency business then in New York and saw it all just combust. Do you think something like that will happen here with social media in general? I asked this in the past few podcasts in terms of digital over the next, as we look at this new unpredictable decade, and with this generation, do you think there'll be this big moment of everything changing for Gen Z in terms of where they're used to communicating their power in this new technology?
I think I think even if there is, there really, really could be. I mean, the bubble could burst really, really quickly. They're already saying, the popularity of TikTok is maybe going to, be at its most in the next 6 months or 12 months, and then they'll try and commercialize it too much, and people will move on with that. But I think what is interesting about what you've just said and this generation is also their attitude towards failure. So if you take it into a gaming mindset, we all grew up in an analog world of if you think of very physical games, let's say a game of chess or something, there's a winner or a loser. The game finishes and it ends. In terms of gaming, you reboot and you start again, and you try and you try again, or you move up different levels. So the research that we've done, and I started researching Gen Zs long before they even started coming of age. So I started in 2015 with my Gen Z research, because I knew there was something very, very different about this generation. So failure is almost a badge of honor. So the one important, and going back to communication as well, is if a brand makes a mistake, this generation, like you say, there's cancel culture there, but they also they want a learning experience. So very much like I said, if I come into work, I'm not there for the job, I'm there to learn. And the more I can learn and the more I can keep learning, the more I will stay with your company. So the very, very same thing about if a brand makes mistakes in terms of communication is you don't just apologize, you explain how you're going to make it right and how you're going to fix it. It goes beyond just a bland press release to say, "Oh, we apologize." You say very, very clearly what the steps you're going to take to make things right again, and Gen Zs will respond to that. And they understand that brands are not all pure and perfect, but they do want to learn from them, and they expect those brands to be able to give them that learning experience and to start up again. So if the bubble does burst within this, I think this is a very resilient generation who will say, okay, move on to the next thing. And like I said, by the time a lot of them are 21, they would have run 2 little companies already and learned some business lessons, to do that. Which begs the question is what they're going to do, or what is the relevance of academic qualifications? But let's not go there, because that's going to take another hour for me to unpack that.
I'd love to go there, but that will be. So here's just a follow-up question on that. What advice would you have for brands to communicate with Gen Z?
Yes, it's it's real authenticity. When we had our little Gen Z release of our last report, which is linked to why I wrote that article, we had some brands and we had some Gen Zs that they were part of a panel. And people were saying, how do I sell you an insurance policy? And you're just going, oh my goodness, this is not going well. But the 21-year-old Gen Z female said, we're going to ask questions. We're not just going to blindly buy a product. We're going to ask, the questions: if the product's sustainable, what is supply chain, does it come from a sweat factory, is it recyclable, is it, a whole lot of kind of things. So the authenticity of a brand, you can't, as we've seen with Black Lives Matter, you can't blackwash or greenwash or pinkwash. You can't hook onto a cause which is very close to their hearts and decide to run a campaign off that, because the inauthenticity of that is going to be very apparent to them, and it will just be, people will not respond to that communication or that campaign at all.
And I wanted to touch the Global Communications podcast. We look at the power of communications to transform. And I just wanted to touch a bit on communicating trends, since we're already talking about communicating to Gen Z. I first met Dion, so the audience knows, back in February in Johannesburg. He was giving, I believe, a quarterly trends report at the time, and I gate crashed with Dion's permission. And I didn't know him at all. And he went to make the presentation, and as a communicator, I was wondering, how is he going to sell this future idea to us? And I noticed right from the beginning, you were able to take us through a story, and you were able to establish trust. So I think what I'm looking for is your gems of wisdom to other communicators and to other business people out there on communicating this information that might be hard for a lot of people to imagine or envision or take on board. Do you have any secrets you like to share? I know part of that's your business, but any helpful insights?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that people need to understand is that we entered a long while ago into a hypervisual era as well. If you look at the numbers and the content studios that a company like YouTube are putting out and enabling their creators to do that, there's a reason why they say death by PowerPoint, because it really, really is death by PowerPoint, because you cannot show graphs and pie charts and stuff like that. So you would have seen in our presentations, and all Flux presentations are there, they're hypervisual ones, because you're allowing, while I'm talking and giving you some information, the image you are already knitting a different story in your head, and that meets with the verbal communication to do that. So we're saying to people, use visuals as much as possible. Tell 1,000 stories with one visual, and if possible, use a lot more video as well. Video is really going to drive that story home, as is sort of the pace of that presentation. So over the past 14 years, we've hopefully we've refined that kind of skill, and a Flux presentation has a very, very definitive style to it. And I think, for people, especially in this year, if you're talking about just communication in terms of stories, what comes across through all of our research, and we hosted a masterclass recently where we asked business owners, tell us what is your biggest challenge, and we will go and research case studies and global best practice, and we'll present it at this masterclass. And one of the things, unsurprisingly, were a lot of questions about communication and marketing. How do you market during a pandemic? Is it heartless to try and sell a product there? What is the language we should use? And so my advice is not only to go visual and to tell those stories, because I think we are reaching that stage in humanity where the digital world is just a very cold, hard place. And we need those human stories. And especially after lockdown, months and months of lockdown, we are craving that human contact. So always frame whatever your message is, especially now with empathy, but frame it within a human context so people can kind of understand it and relate to it. And I think that kind of strategy needs to continue from now. If you haven't changed the language that you're using in terms of communication to be more empathetic, it needs to change immediately, and it needs to last well into 2021. I've written quite a lot, and people can go onto the website. I've written about the concept of anticipatory grief, and it's what everybody in the world is going through with this pandemic. And once you understand the kind of dynamics of anticipatory grief and why it hits us and how it hits us, it's then much easier to be more empathetic to your workforce if you're a business owner, but especially if you're a communicator in marketing. If you understand that anticipatory grief that's going out in the whole world, it's a better way of framing or reframing the message you want to do, because you'll reframe the words completely differently if you understand that that is the situation that everybody is going through. And that anticipatory grief, and specifically the open-endedness of the grief that we're experiencing, is a very, very significant one and a very powerful one, because nobody knows when it's really going to end. So it's just, people want a start and a finish, and we don't have that. And I think when people are disempowered, especially by this virus, the one thing that you can do in terms of communication, I think it's really important as well, is communicate frequently. But I say that with a bit of caution, because we're also all being bombarded by too much stuff. But the frequency and especially the clarity of language, because if people understand something, even if it's bad news, to say, oh, your service is going to be cut, or we're going to have to increase prices there, but it's because this, and that. If you're very, very clear on why you're doing that, it empowers people to feel a little bit more in control. And I think that's the really sort of the takeaway, I think, in terms of communication I wanted to leave, is that people want to regain some sense of control. And if you can do that with communication, clear communication, you'll go a long way in kind of winning people's hearts. And yes, brand loyalty at the end of the day.
That's fantastic. I've really enjoyed the time here, Dion. I thought it was a really fascinating discussion. And before we go, I just wanted to see if there's anything else you'd like to leave our audience with.
Yes, I think one of the things that I've been hammering home to a lot of customers or clients of ours, especially the brands that we work with, is the fact that, yes, every single business on the planet wants to restart, get going. Every single country wants to, boost their economies and get their economies going again. The one blind spot, and that's what Flux Trends enjoys doing, which is uncomfortable for lots of companies to work with, is we point out the blind spots that you might not be seeing. And one of the fundamental blind spots that we are not seeing in this pandemic, or this, I call it the great staggering, because the next 6 to 9 months is going to be this staggered approach to getting businesses going again. The one thing people miss about the great staggering is that everyone sitting at home during lockdown has had an existential crisis. And it means everything's changed. Your priorities have changed. Your need of material goods has changed. Your relationship with family and friends has changed. So it's not just, let's start the business up. We're open for trading, so people will come. It is asking a very, very difficult question, is, does my business still have relevance with the audience? And does my product or service, is it still needed? So there's a fantastic little line I use from the Financial Times where they said every single company has to rethink if they need to rethink the whole business model that they're using, because A, your customers are no longer where they used to be, and secondly, they might not even need your product or service anymore. So how do you fit your business back into a completely changed world? And I think that is really, really key to every business on the planet.
Well, thank you so much, Dion. I really enjoyed this. I think we could do 4 or 5 more podcasts on all these different topics we talked about. But I really appreciate your time. I think it was very informative, and I know the audience will enjoy it.
Great, thank you. And as I said, the education systems, that one will be a very, very lengthy podcast.
Great. Do you want to say anything about that? Just in passing, close.
Yeah, well, just a little nugget. If you really think about education systems around the world, and I think it speaks broadly about the chaos that's going around the world, is that a lot of the systems were spawned in the last century. The education system was actually spawned in the 19th century. And if you think about how schools really function, it was to fit in with an industrial revolution. So there are bells to tell you when to start, when to stop. You are segregated into different things, and we understand now that people develop differently and they respond differently. You know, some people will learn better in a group, some will learn alone, you know, by themselves. And the one quote I loved was, "We are segregated by our age, essentially your date of manufacture." And so everybody's been put into these little boxes and said, you know, let's just shove this education system out. And the world has changed completely. So we're just not there. And like all other systems that I've been talking about, those things need to change totally, because we are entering this, well, I'll say it again, this new world order.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dion. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Sandra. Thanks.
You're welcome, Dion.